good to go. So I can see that most of the people are able to see the slides, and you can probably hear me as well, so that's good. So quick intro. So my name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a principal consultant from Microsoft Consulting Services. I'm actually moving into a new role, but that's a secret, so let's not tell that one to anybody yet. So let's talk about that slightly later. But today we're going to talk about real-world examples of FTC to app model transformation. And actually, just a side note, the title of the session is intentionally said transformation. This is not about migration. We are not actually ever going to be in the status that we're able to take the FTC code, run a button, click a button, and suddenly you will have a completely reformatted stuff which will work in the app world. That's not reality. Maybe in years and years and years, but maybe not in the short time frame. And that's the reason why we call it as a transformation. Other side note, actually, on the topic of the session, we don't use the CAM, we'd rather use the app model in the future. So because the app model is also a model for the on-premises. But let's talk about all of that during the session. Anyway, let's actually concentrate on the topic. And the topic was to understand the required steps to transfer from the FTC deployments to the new app model world. So in quote-unquote appification steps. So what does it actually mean that we have existing SharePoint deployment running full trust code, and how do we actually transform that to be appified, which is completely invented word, but I've personally started using a while back. We use a use case. This is a use case which we used actually in the SharePoint conference as well. So a customer is actually a customer from Finland, a global customer. I'm just double checking that my slides are actually switching. So the customer is actually from Finland called UPM, and the UPM is a mid-sized customer with the sales of 10 billion. And present in 65 countries, production plants in 15 countries, 22K employees. So not a massive one, but pretty big one already. And the shares listed in Nasdaq Helsinki. If you go to www.upm.com, you're able to actually see more additional details about the company. They are actually Office 365 dedicated customer, which is pretty much the same as they would be in the the transformation is pretty much the same as transformation within the on-premises as well, because the dedicated is pretty much matching the on-premises hosting of SharePoint. Good. Let's actually move on the topic. So the key point when we start. So let's not actually start with the technical stuff. Let's start slightly on the business background, and then we have a look on the how was the solution looking in 2010, and why did they actually want to go there? So why did they actually want to go to the new app model? What was the design or the business case, and why was that actually important for them? That's the number one question what many of our customers are quite often asking. We did an analysis with the UPM. We did this kind of a vision session with them, and these were the four bullets or the key topics or pillars why they want to actually go to the app world, why they want to do the transformation. They wanted to be cloud ready. They didn't actually want to go to the Office 365. That wasn't the number one thing. They wanted to be cloud ready. And what that means is that they can actually now choose, do they want to host their customizations or the SharePoint deployment in the on-premises or within the cloud, and any cloud where they want to. So they can now actually do a comparison every single year, maybe if they want, on the agreement of the, let's say, Office 365. Okay, this is the price tag for Office 365. Do we have a competitors which are able to compete? And if there is, that they're able to switch without any redeveloping of the customizations. So giving that flexibility for them, that was really important for their management or the executive level. We are obviously really confident that Office 365 is the one where they want to be in the future as well. But it's just giving them, they wanted to have that freedom to choose, which we can actually provide with an app world appification of the customization. The second thing was an agility for business. So the one major pain point for them in 2010 or in the full trust code was the fact that whenever there was a new customization, what the business wanted to get in, let's say in the front page of the intranet or some new widget which would show a weather or whatever. Because they didn't use SharePoint Designer, they used full trust code, and they didn't want to compromise their intranet. There was a massive ALM story, ALM process, which the code had to go through. And because it's hosted in Office 365 dedicated, the story and the timeline was actually even longer. So the business started complaining that whenever there is a new widget which we need, it takes 6 weeks to get it in the front page of the intranet. This is not 2014. This is like 2009. We need to change it. And with the App World implementation, we can actually do that. It's up to the customer. We can more faster deploy the functionalities in a more reliable way without compromising the SharePoint, without compromising the intranet or the team sites or the My Sites. And that's a pretty significant thing. The third bullet point is the cost efficiency. So they wanted to save money also from a customization perspective because the process is, well, the bigger the ALM process is, the application lifecycle process, the more money it actually takes. And they wanted to have that freedom to compare the prices. If they're running FTC, they have to run it in an on-prem or on-prem-like environment. If they actually run app way of implementing stuff, they can actually run it anywhere they want. And that certainly gives them flexibility and for the business. And obviously one of the things what they wanted to do is that they wanted to efficiently use the out-of-the-box capabilities. So quite often actually in the case of UPM as well, we started analyzing the existing FTC and we found out that let's say 25% of the customizations are not actually used. So they were not needed. They were needed at the time when they were implemented, but then they were not needed anymore. And then we started the discussion that is it actually worthwhile to upgrade all of that to 2013 in a full trust code, or should we just amplify the critical part and make sure that the value is there for business, but let's drop that unnecessary burden what we've been carrying with the customizations. And then as a kind of a final topic is customized for business value. That's more a business thinking inside of the customer, that they wanted to actually change the thinking away from the fact that let's always implement a widget, rather on the model that let's always create a clear business case. So if somebody needs to have a widget, let's have a process where somebody actually calculates what the investment for the widget and is it actually bringing us value. So we're not actually just writing the code or customization for the sake of the customization. We rather analyze every single thing what we're doing. So let's move forward on the slide. So what was the 2010 implementation? So let's have a quick look on the key topics on the 2010 implementation, so you understand the scale and you understand what was actually done. And the UPM case is actually pretty highly customized. So the UPM portal, well, it consisted from the pretty typical setup: intranet, team sites, My Sites, and some additional thingies. But the intranet, really pretty typical setup. It's a corporate communicational intranet, mainly for content sharing, but it's highly customized branding. So you can see from the pictures, which are pretty small, I know, but you can see that it doesn't actually look like a SharePoint because it's using publishing features, so it's almost like a .com site, but it's still their own corporate communicational intranet. And it was 2,000 sites in a one-site collection. That's a sidetrack, not really relevant for the appification, but it gives you the size of the things, and you can figure out, well, you can understand the size of the customer. The other thing what they also had was the collaboration and My Sites. It's pretty typical stuff. Every single customer who uses SharePoint want to do collaboration and My Sites. But these were also highly customized from a branding perspective, and there was also quite a lot of other customizations in the sites. One of the let's say a bad customizations was the fact that the team sites were using publishing features by default. That was a decision what I made back in 2010, which I now regret. And let's talk about that one slightly later on the session. But it's a good example of the things that the customer wanted to decustomize their functionalities, and then they wanted to have actually out-of-the-box team site experience in 2013. So now the challenge is how do we actually move these existing theme sites, which have a publishing feature enabled, to out-of-the-box SharePoint 2013 with the slightly branded sites. And that was a really interesting story, which we're going to talk about slightly later on today. If you think about the statistics in 2010, the scale, this gives nicely the scale of the customizations. So they had 25 web templates, obviously not site definitions, those are not allowed in Office 365 dedicated, and you shouldn't do site definitions. 65 features, 15 content types, 30 web parts, 20 web controls, 20 page layouts, 12 timer jobs, and now I'm seeing that the network connectivity file sharing of the monitor probably went down. So I'm going to actually establish that one more time. Let's wait a second that people actually get the monitor back on. And double checking, somebody in IM can say, can you see the screen? Paul might be interfering. Good. Oh, not yet. Loading. Good. So let's wait for the maturity, at least few people actually getting the screen. It's always the thing. I wouldn't blame software. It's a, see it now. Good, good, good. Excellent. So back on the slide. So they had pretty typical setup. This is a pretty typical setup for a highly customized SharePoint. So you have a 20 web controls, like the left side navigation or top side navigation, 20 page layouts, 12 timer jobs, which were doing miscellaneous stuff. Actually, central admin customizations. Obviously, those were not supported in the Office 365 dedicated either, but this used to be a hybrid deployment with an on-prem side and then the dedicated side. So in the on-prem side, we had central admin customizations as well. And then a hybrid self-service site collection creation, which means that we created the 80 groups, associated them to FIM, and created the site collections, either the on-prem or the dedicated platform based on the metadata selection of the end user. Pretty typical stuff actually for a larger customer, of larger enterprises, but also highly technical stuff to implement. If we have a look on the overall architectural landscape in 2010, just to give you again the context of this customer, because this has a meaning in our, let's say, cost savings. This was the 2010 landscape, which had then the daily build. It had the development, individual VM boxes for every single developer. It had the build verification form. It had the QA forms, quality assurance form. And it had the production farm and the different production farms for within the cloud and within the on-prem. So it was roughly a 75 servers, to be honest. So it's pretty significant deployment. Not a typical setup, I would say, for SharePoint. Really big setup for SharePoint. But they were at the time, the model was that they wanted to have this as let's say, implemented by the book. So you have a dev box, you have a daily build, you have IT testing, integration testing environment, and all of that stuff. So it was a highly complex thing. Let's see if we can actually get the sharing. I'll start this. Let's do it this way. I can see from the IM that there are some technical things. I'm going to actually end the slideshow. I'm going to do a quick new start of the sharing. Let's actually restart sharing one more time. Not the first time that this happens. It's the 99 participant issue. No, it's not. I'm going to actually start the presentation one more time. And good, excellent. And just for information, so we're actually sharing. There's no presentation which we're looking. I'm sharing one of my screens because we're doing some demos as well. But good, now we're getting good answers, so that you're actually seeing the slides. Good. So moving on the things. And the key point of the learnings from 2010 was this was academically right way to do the stuff. This was certainly the right way to do it if you want to have a 100% certainty that all of your stuff actually what goes to from a technical perspective, from a IT perspective, you know exactly when you go to the production that nothing breaks. But then the reality is the massive costs. And then the reality is also the fact that the business started complaining. They started complaining that it actually takes them way too long to get any widget done, like I mentioned already. And that's actually a pretty common scenario. So the IT tries to do their best on making the technical implementation, matching the best practices and the academically right way to do stuff. But then the business, what the IT is actually giving services, starts complaining that even though you have a massively interesting and awesome IT solution, it doesn't actually fulfill the requirements what we have, which is agility, which is more efficient way of sharing, and said that they are able to actually use the platform more efficiently. And the key point with SharePoint is that it's not a SharePoint which requires this. And now that we move in the app world, we don't actually necessarily need to. Well, it's up to us what kind of the model we want to do. In the case of UPM, the 6 weeks was also dependent on the fact that there's a certain longer review period when you submit any full trust code to the Office 365 dedicated. So this is the dedicated platform where the customer is. And that took quite a long time as well. So customer wanted to actually change that. That it doesn't match the utility what the business is looking for. So therefore they want to actually change that to a faster way. So how did we actually start looking into this one? So obviously we need to first understand what do we have. So number one thing is that you need to understand what kind of customizations we have and how they are actually used. But then the number two learning or number two step is to understand that there's really no one-to-one match. You can't go and say that every single web part will be an app part because that's not true. And that's definitely not actually what you should be looking. And we're going to talk about that one during the demos as well. And so the app part to the web part to an app part, it might be true, but we need to understand that there's no really one-to-one match. We can't really create an automated tool which is saying, because in the old world you have X and Y and Z, in the new world you need to have X and whatever, or A, B, C. And that doesn't work like that. There are certain options which we can actually take, and I'm going to talk about that one as well. And just quickly checking the questions, we'll be outlining the areas in which we would have to compromise with FTC to app model conversion. Example would be site provisioning branding. So yes, we can talk about actually all of those different learnings. And so the following thing is to understand, to be able to really understand, jumping to a wrong slide, really understand what those functionalities actually are for. We need to understand why did we implement them in the first place. So why did the customer or the business ask this functionality in the first place? We shouldn't be just converting every single bits and piece because we kind of know why it's there. We rather should go back and ask, okay, so what is it actually used? Do we have the requirements collected or not? If we don't understand the requirements and the business functionality, what we're trying to solve, we might actually do the conversion right, but then it's not actually matching what the customer was looking for. In the case of UPM, in this particular project, the one thing what we also wanted to do before we go to the actual solutions and different options and implementations, I'm going to do some coding demo as well. We also wanted to do a gradual transformation. And this was good in the sense that we introduced gradually those changes for the end user. So first what we did was that we renew, to be honest, we upgraded and appified in a single step the OneDrive for Business, so which used to be the My Site. So essentially in December to last year, in December, we upgraded the My Sites, and at the same time when we did the upgrade, we actually appified the My Sites. So we got rid of all of the full text code, essentially, which was in the master pages, and all of the other stuff which was related on My Site. And that gave us the opportunity for the end users to get access on the SharePoint 2013 experience in the appified way already as soon as possible, even though we knew that we have, let's say, challenges ahead when we move into the intranet upgrade. The following step was actually starting to provision new team sites, new collaboration sites using the appified implementation. So now whenever there's a self-service site collection form, people go to the self-service site collection form. I'm going to show that one as well. And they order new team sites. Those new team sites were implemented in the appified way. They were provisioned automatically for the end user, and then end user got an email that your site is now available, and that was actually created using the appified technique, site collection creation and so on. And then in March, well, to be honest, it slightly went delayed from there. The intranet was upgraded, so the real intranet, the big one, which had the 2,000 sites, and was a publishing feature, where we then upgraded the intranet. Started with the front page and then gradually changed all of the master pages in associations within all of the sites, and changed the page layouts for the intranet. And that's now fully appified. The one thing what's actually the still kind of a tracking down or still to be done is the full team site migration. And the reason why it's actually tackling UPM, this might not be the case in your case, and we're going to talk about this slightly more detailed in the later of the deck as well, is that we wanted to actually get rid of the publishing feature in the team sites. So in the old implementation in the UPM case, they had publishing features enabled in a team site, and we wanted to get rid of that so we can get more advantage on the out-of-the-box team site experience in 2013, which is awesome. So the customer wanted to do decustomization on that. And the decision is good. It does, however, has pretty significant impact, because it means that we need to do real migration of getting the content out and then create the new site within the native out-of-the-box experience and then push the content in and apply the branding. So that's the reason why the team sites are slightly difficult in the case of this particular customer. If you are, however, let's say if you have an out-of-the-box, almost out-of-the-box team sites in 2013 in the full test code, you can much more easily appify them just by changing the master page and replacing the web parts and so on. Let's go to the actual solutions. I know that most of the audience is probably interested on how were these things actually implemented in SharePoint in 2013. It's like, no, cut that one down. We know how to do the full test code. Show me how those things were actually done. So the number one thing what we actually first implemented, which is quite common, is the self-service site collection creation. Because immediately when we start using the self-service, if we take the ownership of the site collection and a sub-site creation, we can control what is actually created and how. And what I mean with that is that we are able to create out-of-the-box site collections, but then as part of this process, we are applying the needed branding, content types, site columns, whatever we want, and app parts and other customizations to the site, as long as we take an ownership of the site collection creation. The alternative, obviously, is that you go to the central admin or you go to the tenant admin UI, you create the site collection, and then you start figuring out how do I actually get the stuff in. But if you own the site provisioning, you're able to actually own the whole piece. And it is pretty complex thing, but this is well, there are already a lot of internal IP available in the internet, and I'm going to share some of those IPs in the session as well. But looking those numbers, I'm not going to do animation for a purpose because there's always a delay when we switch between the slides. But end user goes to a form which is actually from the provider hosted apps, and the end user submits the request in the bullet point number 1. Then the first thing what the provider hosted apps in the UPM case is doing, it is actually creating AD groups. You don't necessarily need to do that, but that was their decision. They want to actually create an AD group and associate and manipulate the permissions using AD groups in a SharePoint, which is completely doable from a provider-hosted application side. And that AD group train is essentially then synced to the theme, and then those AD groups are operated and managed and administered by the site collection administrator. Then the following step is that we, in the case of UPN, we use the custom WCF endpoint to create the site collection in the dedicated farm, because there's no site collection creation in on-prem using CSAM. Well, to be honest, that's going to be changed pretty fast, but for the time being, when this was implemented, there was no out-of-the-box CSAM to create site collections in on-premises. So we implemented this custom WCF endpoint, which doesn't actually modify data. It's just exposing additional API for the time being until we have a native out-of-the-box capability of doing that. So that's kind of a slightly different than running the stuff in FTC mode. And then we applied all of the branding in using the CSAM and REST interfaces. That's the number 6 point. So we're applying, creating content types, site columns, applying branding, all of that requirements, creating the lists, pushing documents, whatever has to be done, using then CSAM and REST. And then obviously we'll send an email to the requester so that they know that the site has been created. Pretty typical self-service site collection creation technique. And what it meant is that they essentially, as an end result, when you request a site, this is what you're getting. And this is looking highly different, actually, than the 2010. And I actually mentioned the decustomization objective as well. This is pretty close to out of the box. But it actually has a custom master page as well. Because there are some hidden elements in here, which I'm not going to show live, but I can actually show from the slides. So we do have, for example, a site collection, cross-site collection navigation. Anywhere you are in any site collection in this deployment, there's always intranet home and tools links on the top left corner. There's also the edit intranet profile, which is a custom implementation, which is kind of a hidden with the out-of-the-box functionalities, so that people don't actually feel that this is highly customized and all of the out-of-the-box guidance is still completely valid. But we're kind of hidden a lot of these elements in. And then the basic layout is slightly different than the out-of-the-box theme layout whenever you actually get the out-of-the-box theme layout. And this is, there's a question when this was completely synchronous process. So this is completely asynchronous process because we certainly didn't want end users to wait the site collection to be created. So the end users went to a form, and they submitted a request. That request is stored in a list, and then we have a remote timer job. Remote timer job, not a timer job, the classic timer job. A remote timer job is reading that list and then provisioning the site collections as needed, so that the end user doesn't have to wait in the UI to get the site collection created, which is obviously a good practice. Will the custom WCF endpoint be allowed in Office 365 multi-tenant or single? So don't get that wrong. That was only needed in dedicated. The multi-tenant has an API to create site collections remotely. So there's a fully supported way of creating remote site collections in the multi-tenant side. And that's a good question, so we get that one clarified. Anyway, so not highly customized, but it has a custom branding, it has a custom theme, and a custom master page to some of these settings, like the modifications in the main navigation. So not necessarily a good thing that it actually has a custom master page. If you can, let's avoid the custom master pages, because if you can actually use out-of-the-box master page, you get the updates on the out-of-the-box master page as well. So. And the question related on the dedicated site collection creation, it is coming soon, and we do have a solution for it already, which will be coming out in my blog post as a initial submission pretty fast, but it will be coming to the dedicated in a few months. And that's a long discussion, but anyway. And this is the OneDrive for business. So this is the MySite, the new 2013 MySite experience. It's pretty much, again, out of the box, but it has a custom theme, and it has a custom master page applied as well. So it's making sure that the end user experience is pretty much consistent if you are in team sites or collaboration sites, or if you are in MySite. So it has the kind of a customer-specific branding colors, and then the main navigation is kind of a following up, and the intranet home, as an example, is following up all the time the end user. So if you get lost, you can always click there, and you're back in the root or in the intranet front page. And then these are pretty simple. The let's say highly complex one is the one which I unfortunately cannot show, and that's actually for a reason. Obviously, they have pretty confidential information in their intranet, so I can't just open that one up for the internet. But I can show a mock-up, and in this mock-up, it's a pretty small, I know, but you're able to see that there's multiple elements in the mock-up of the front page. And in the front page, we have, for example, user-specific weather. I'm going to actually just highlight this. We have user-specific linking and pictures, like if you belong to UPMIT, you have a different functionalities in the front page. We have My Links, so you're able to actually create your personal links, which will be always visible in the front page. And now, whenever you go back on the front page, you can always see that list. Well, somebody might say that, yeah, that's the favorites in the browser, which is a valid statement, but that was a request from the customer. We have a personalized newsfeed, which is in here. Well, the corporate news, which is a personalized based on the particular user. So if you belong to a different organization, you get a different set of news based on the other people in a different organization or location. We also raised the personal newsfeed from the My Site, because they're not using Yammer yet, but they're using still the old model. Raised that one in the front page, and then there's a lot of links and for example, tweets from the Twitter. So, but the interesting part of this one is this is completely implemented without full trust code. There's no full trust code of any of those personalization, any of those news aggregations, any of those functionalities, what we say here. And how they are actually implemented is that they're not also app parts. There's no app parts in this page. Because just as well, the app part, JavaScript, you can actually put that JavaScript on the master page or in the page layout. And in the case of this particular front page, many of those things, like all of those fellows except the personal newsfeed, everything what has been circled right now in the picture has been implemented as a embedded JavaScript. And what it means is that there's a JavaScript, there's a div essentially for a location of the image or a location of the weather. And then based on the JavaScript implementation, because we have a JavaScript CSUM, we're able to say, SharePoint, who is this person? Okay, it's Vesa. Based on Vesa's user profile entries, where is the Vesa actually coming from? Oh, Vesa is coming from Finland. Excellent. Which organization unit Vesa is belonging to? Oh, he belongs to the IT organization. So therefore, I will go and use the search REST APIs to aggregate that relevant news for me. Or I will show that image in this section of the front page based on my user profile. And that's a really interesting scenario because there's no app parts, there's no full trust code, but you're still able to do more, well, basically all of what was required from a business requirement perspective. Obviously, we need to do caching. So we need to remember that whenever we do this JavaScript level things, we're checking, for example, my personal user profile settings or properties. We need to store that so that we're not actually hitting the user profile store on every single request, because that would be just insane, and the loading time of the front page would take way too long. But we're able to use cookies, we're able to use HTML5 local store to store that information. So the next time I'm actually on the front page, it can actually read that information from the local store, or it can read that information from the cookie where it's stored, let's say, for 24 hours. And then within the 24 hours, it will refresh the settings in my browser, which is actually then helping on the performance and the loading time of the front page, and obviously everything is asynchronous as well. So the front page will be there, and then JavaScript starts filling the elements and functionalities as we go. There's a question, there's a native SharePoint social field and plans to switch to Yammer. This particular customer is looking into switching to Yammer and definitely doable, but they have a 22,000 end users, and it's a training challenge. It's not a technical challenge. It's the change management challenge. If we have taught and we have training material and we have taught 22,000 people to use the old newsfeed, it does take a while to reteach them, and it's not actually the time, it's the money we need to spend on the change management. So technical solution-wise, yes, certainly, that's not a challenge. Quickly checking Robert's question, we're on a dedicated now looking into moving to the service fabric and convergence. Is it correct that we will get the same site correction API that the multi-tenant customers have today? That is correct. That is definitely correct for the dedicated converged platform, which is pretty technical statement, which probably not that many know in the call. But anyway, so it's a really interesting approach that we don't always need to implement apps. We are using the particular user's identity and the JavaScript in the front page to actually come with a highly dynamic front page, which is providing the personalized experience. So definitely a valid approach. And I was actually, the following thing is that I was thinking to show some of that stuff. How is it actually implemented? So 3 things. Number 1, pretty simple JavaScript-driven modification. Just going to show that quickly. I know that the screen sharing has a small delay. Let's do that relatively fast. But the whole point is that how we can modify SharePoint with the JavaScript and not necessarily even modify the master page or the page layout. And then it's up to the JavaScript. Does it actually have the social API call, or what does it actually do? The second demo, what I was planning to do is the sub-site templating model, a major deal, because whenever the end user is actually in the team site or collaboration site collection, what will happen? Well, they get that branded, nice-looking collaboration team site. What if they go and create a sub-site? How do we then apply the branding to the sub-site? So self-service site collection creation is pretty typical stuff. But then we need to start thinking slightly wider. If the end user goes to that intranet portal and creates a sub-site, how do we make sure that that publishing site, which is created as a sub-site, because everything is out-of-the-box publishing sites, that has the right branding and right settings and different page layouts and so on. And I'm going to show that model with the sub-site templating model. And then the third thing is the remote timer job. Somebody was asking that. Again, I'm really bad in names, so I already forgot that name. But how you can, as an example, execute a remote timer job either in Windows Azure or within a computer or within a laptop, which is scheduled, let's say, using Windows Scheduler. It's completely up to you how you want to schedule that. But then it's a timer job which is using the app model and OAuth to actually access the SharePoint and then modify stuff without the end user actually interacting with the SharePoint, which is a really, really important, let's say, pattern to understand, because that's the story how we do asynchronous creation of site collections. Can we get the mixed data source web part, getting the data various sources like list, RSS feed, and HTML? I'm not actually really quite super sure. Is that related on, can we get the out-of-the-box web part, or? But if it's an out-of-the-box web part, it's completely there, and you can certainly use any of the out-of-the-box web parts in the Applified world as well. The thing is that you can't just implement the custom versions out of them. Good. Switching to the actual code. Just double checking you guys can see the code, right? I'm also double checking that there's people actually listening. Excellent. I have a 1 person, 2 persons who's actually listening what I'm saying. Brilliant. So, okay, a few more. I'm going to mute my laptop. There we go. So this is the first demo, which is essentially showing the JavaScript injection technique. I'm going to run the demo just from my Visual Studio. I'm going to actually, all of these demos will be available for you, but I'm going to show today. They are actually available for you already today, but I'm not sure if you know from where. So I'm going to start the demo. It's going to open up a Visual Studio. So Visual Studio is going to open up the browser, and it's going to ask me to log in. And I'm using my multi-tenant. One of the multi-tenants, what I'm actually have as a dev site, and the reason why I don't press the remember me is that because I have quite a few of these tenants, so I don't want to hook in one tenant. So this particular demo, this particular solution is pretty simple, and I'm going to actually zoom in, which most likely will take a while to go to the other side. But this is a quick demo on the fact that how do we do JavaScript injection. And what I mean with JavaScript injection is that we actually, from an app side, this could be a site provisioning app, this could be a site collection provisioning app, this could be app installed event. It really doesn't actually matter where do we actually start the process. We make sure that as part of the host web execution, our custom JavaScript is executed as well, which is actually a pretty scary thing in some sense, because if you do a mistake within your JavaScript, that will be visible in the host web as well. But if you know what you're doing and you need to do, let's say, a branding or a functionality or a widget or let's say, a show image based on the particular user's user profile entry or whatever you want to do, this would be a pretty usable model without even modifying or changing to the custom master page. So what I'm now doing is that I'm clicking the inject customization button. That's going to run a while in my local host, in my imaginary Windows Azure, or in my provider hosted platform. And right now what it did is that it hooked that JavaScript on the host web as a custom action. And the custom action is something what we actually had in 2010, SharePoint 2010 already in the feature framework. We are just creating this custom action now using client-side object model. And essentially what we did is that we just hooked to a structure within the front host web, and then we did a message for the end user. There's an actually really good question from Martin, and I'll get back on the Sudhir's question as well. What about changes on the SharePoint DOM? So right now, this particular implementation, this particular demo, I'm modifying the host web, which has an out-of-the-box master page, which is true. It might change, and there might be a DOM level structure changes, and that would actually break my JavaScript. Because I wouldn't be able to find the location. Well, to be honest, in this particular case, I'm actually using the out-of-the-box message, which will be there in the future as well, because it's the out-of-the-box messaging infrastructure to add that message in, and then I'm adding two images and some, an image and a text for the message. But it's true that if you take a dependency on the out-of-the-box master page and somebody changes the DOM structure, meaning the HTML structure, you might not be able to hook in the right location from your JavaScript. And valid concern. And then we need to either update the JavaScript or think about alternative options. But it's an interesting scenario. If you are using a custom master page, you own the DOM. So therefore, you're able to then use whatever you want and hook in JavaScript to wherever location you want. The other question is, can we inject JavaScript without manual intervention? Like any new site is created, will have the JavaScript injected. Yes, we can. So whenever you create a new site, you need to, if you take an ownership of the site creation, then you can. So whenever you provision a new subsite, as an example, which we're going to do in one of these demos as well, you would be able to add this JavaScript in, and then JavaScript can then modify the end user experience. Okay, that's a pretty simple scenario, but point being on the fact that we have a JavaScript which is actually running right now, hooked from the app, and that could be reading my user profile, it could be checking and providing images in the in the front page, or whatever you want to do. It could actually switch the theming or coloring in the site based on my user profile property. That's an interesting demo, which I probably need to write. Good. Let's take another one. The other demo, what I wanted to do quickly is let's do the climate job demo. So this is another demo which we created as part of the examples which are available for you as well. I'll share it's from the officeams.codeplex.com, and the URL will be on the slides as well. So this is a simple climate job demo, simple remote climate job demo. And you've probably seen a few of these demos presented in TechEd or in SharePoint conference. And what I do here is I'll try to explain what I'm actually doing. So what I'm doing is that I'm deploying a SharePoint app to my tenant. And the SharePoint app always has a client ID, and it has a secret. And as part of the initial installation of the SharePoint app, you have to approve the permissions for the SharePoint app. So you deploy the SharePoint app to the Office 365, and then somebody says, yes, approve. There is an alternative way of getting these permissions for the remote time job, but this is, I think, a slightly easier way to do it, at least from a understanding perspective. So I'm adding a normal SharePoint app in, which is requesting right permissions, and I give the right permissions to that client ID and a secret, which means that as long as I know the client ID and a secret, I can access that site on behalf of that app, especially if I'm using the app-only token. So I'm able to just use the client ID and the secret, and because the permissions have been given, I'm able to then access the site without any end-user intervention. And what I mean with that one is that I'll go to the host web. We're able to see that we don't have, we have just 3 apps, or 2 apps, 3 apps actually. And the host web, we have the JavaScript injection still there, but nothing that special in the host web at this point. I'm going to open up another solution. And the reason why I'm doing is that I actually need to double check the client ID and the secret. So I'm going to open up my console application, which has a app config. And then I'm double checking that the client ID, which I'm going to use for connecting against Office 365, is matching to that app, which is essentially the registration into Office 365. The alternative way to do this is to use apprec new and register a client ID and get a permissions manually done. But this way, I'm actually have a separate app, and then I'm using a timer job, remote timer job as a console application connecting to the SharePoint. So this is a console application, which is essentially, this could be scheduled to be running in the Windows Azure web jobs. This could be running in my own laptop as a scheduled Windows service or in a Windows server. This could be running wherever I want, or I could be executing this from a PowerShell. But what I'm doing is that I'm actually using the app-only access token, and I'm getting access to that information using the client ID and the secret what I have in the app config. And what it means is that I can get access now that the app and the client ID and the secret has given those permissions. I can run this console application, which is running in here, as my remote timer job to manipulate. Like in this case, what I'm doing is that it's checking, is the list remote operation on the site? Oh, it's not on the site. Let's create the list. And while we're on it, actually, let's create an entry to the list, a new list entry with the timing. So I can actually prove that it's right now, at least in my local time. And let's execute that. So completely asynchronous, this could be running, and it could be scheduled to be executed in every single minute. For example, to check are there new requests for site collection. Oh, there is a new request for the site collection. Let's create the site collection and send an email for the person who has requested the site collection. So that's the model how we did the self-service site collection creation. And let's actually jump on the browser side. So I'm going to refresh the site, so we're able to see then that we have a new list on the site. So I'm refreshing that dev site. There's a new list called remote operation. I'm going to, most likely you didn't actually see updated this fast, but you can hear what I'm saying. I'm going to zoom in the remote operation list and that new list entry, which is saying that timing is 7:50 p.m. in the European way of presenting that if you're calling from US. So 7:50 p.m., which actually reminds me I'm running out of time. Damn it. A quick demo on that one. So the final thing, there was a question related on the final thing, but I wanted to quickly show. I'm going to do this pretty fast because you get access to all of this code. And the question was, can we do the JavaScript installation automatically without the manual intervention, which is an excellent question. And the answer is yes, we can. We can do whatever we want if we take an ownership of the site creation. And that's actually the trick. If you take an ownership of the site collection creation or the subsite creation, you can do whatever you want within your code. So I'm going to start the app. I'm going to, again, signing in to my dev tenant. I'm going to click to keep me signed in, so because I have quite a few of these tenants. And working on it, we will actually get to this small provider-hosted app. And this app, I'm going to quickly zoom in slightly. There we go. Is well, it looks like a SharePoint create a subsite functionality. So it's asking a title and a description. It is asking the website address, and then it's asking me to select a template. The templates are Contoso team, Garage team, SPC team, Contoso blog, and Contoso community sites. The interesting thing about those teams is that it really doesn't matter which one of those you select, except the Contoso, the community or blog one. The Contoso team, Garage team, and the SPC team, they all provision out-of-the-box team site first. But then they start modifying that based on the settings. So then they start modifying based on the settings by providing a branding, by providing a left-side navigation entries, by providing additional lists, and whatever settings, like the JavaScript injection on that created site. So let's actually create a site. This does take a 1 minute or 2 minutes. So let's call this webcast. In a webcast, the URL will be webcast. I'm going to use the Garage team, so we're able to actually see a significant change. I'm not sure if you can see the UI right now. But there's a nice GIF animation which is saying working on it. You've probably seen that message if you're a SharePoint person, because it's working on it. But it's giving the indication for the end user, because I'm creating a subsite. It takes a while to actually get it done. While we're doing that, there's a question, what about injecting JavaScript on the personal site, as personal sites are created on its own? Is it a time job who will have permissions to a specific site? How to give permissions to the time job to access all the site collections in one. You're able to actually give the permissions to the time job to do, let's say, tenant level permissions. That would be one way to get it. So if you ask tenant level permissions for the time job, and then you're able to scan through the site collections and modify the site collections. The alternative way is actually to inject the JavaScript from a hidden app part. And 2 weeks ago, was it 2 weeks ago, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I did a session, Ignite 2013 webcast as well, where we actually demonstrated that. So we have a hidden kind of a My Site customizer, which will modify the My Site, and therefore you can actually put the JavaScript in for the end users. But now, you can probably see at least a black screen, and we're able to see that we created a new subsite, which is completely branded. And there are actually some new settings. There are presentation library. There are left navigation entries, which are Garage and Twitter, Garage and YouTube. We have a nice branding and all of that applied. And what we also have is that JavaScript added on the site, because now the logical question, which most of you are probably already thinking, okay, but what happens if I now go to the subsite creation? Well, now when you go to the site content, and you click the new subsite creation, we actually take an ownership of the creation of the subsite. And you're able to do this in a farm level as well. As long as you get the JavaScript in on the sites, as long as you provision the site collection by yourself, so therefore you can actually hook in the JavaScript, and in the JavaScript we update that link to point to a provider-hosted app. So therefore, whenever somebody goes and creates the subsites, we can take an ownership of the site provisioning. I know that it's a pretty advanced scenario, but if we truly want to control what gets created, and we want to have that pretty much the same experience as for the full trust code with the site definitions and web templates and all of that, you can certainly do that within the appified world as well. Good. Moving back on the slides, because I can see that the time is flying when you're having fun. I could talk about this stuff for like years and hours and hours and hours. Well, that's what I actually do for a living. A lot about talking, not that much delivering. That's a joke, kind of, because I'm a consultant. Anyway, so let's actually move on back on the slides. The one thing what I wanted to quickly touch still is actually the requirements related on migration. So it's not just implementing the technical thing. It's also the fact that we need to think about what do we do with the existing sites. We have existing sites. Whenever we talk about FTC to appified, we have already existing sites which have the full trust code running. How do we get that full trust code away from the existing sites? So we're able to, let's say, move that site to Office 365, or we're able to retract the solutions, or we're able to, whatever is your objective. The key challenge on this part is definitely the fact that how do we actually remove the dependency of the existing sites on the full trust code. The new site, that's easy. The new team sites, the new my sites, and new whatever. If we can always create a new stuff, we can easily do that. What about the existing stuff? So the number one thing, the easy thing, is obviously if we think about master pages and page layouts. Oops, that's a wrong slide. Sorry. How did that happen? I'm going to jump to the right slide. So if we think about page layouts and master pages, we can pretty easily use client-side object model to scan through the site collection. And, well, number one thing, upload the appified page layouts and master pages to the site collection. Number two thing, scan through your existing sites and pages and sites within the site collection and modify every single page to then use the new page layout. And that's what we did in the case of UPM, and that's what we're doing with many of the other customers as well. And the key point of that one is that you want to actually, the picture what we have on the slide is trying to explain that. Don't ever put your code in just on the provider hosted application in the ASP.NET ASP.NET. You want to relocate your component remote objects or remote operations to a reusable component so that you're able to then execute this same process without the web app. Let's say from a PowerShell, and then the PowerShell is calling these remote objects and methods which are then running against Office 365 and or dedicated or on-premises farm, and that is doing the modifications and changing of the page layouts and master pages. The kind of a similar process with the web parts and controls. So, well, the web controls are easy because the web controls, when we change the master page, we get rid of the web controls. When we change the page layout, we get rid of the web controls. Well, how do we get rid of them? We implement a corresponding functionality using JavaScript, or we drop them. Obviously, you cannot have full trust code in the Office 365, or if you want to have a fully appified experience, we just need to do that. We can also replace the functionalities with the pre-configured out-of-the-box web parts, which is quite often actually a suitable one. What I mean with that one is that it's just even the content editor web part. You can save versions out of content editor web parts, which has the predefined layout, predefined text, which is saying, here you go, this is a text editing, whatever, layout or a banner for you. Just modify the text and you're good to go. Replace with app part instances, definitely a valid option. So the app part instance is if you want to have the same experience, well, it's not an equal experience with the web parts, but it's pretty much, you can make it pretty nice experience with the app parts as well. Or then again, use the embedded JavaScript option. There's a good question. Can you use the app stapling to deliver some of these customizations? The app stapling refers to the fact that we do a centralized deployment of the app, and the problem with the app stapling is that you don't actually deploy the app to be available in every single site in reality. So what you actually do with the app stapling is that you have one instance of the apps underneath your app catalog. The app will be visible in the site content, but you can't get app parts on the host web, and you can't actually automate the modifications to the sites using the app stapling. The app part installation requires enabling of app site loading in the site. So if you use that term and you go to the MSDN blocks or do a search in Bing or Google or Yahoo or whatever, app site loading, you will actually see a blog post which is explaining how to enable a feature which will give you the opportunity to install apps on the site, and then you're able to deactivate the feature, because we don't actually recommend that to be running all the time. And I'm really sorry about going slightly wide on the timing, but let's move on the following slide. The one thing what I've got a lot of feedback in my own blog, this is like the number one blog entry what I did. I said, stop creating site columns and content types using XML. And people went, well, some people went ballistic. No, they didn't went ballistic. They went, it's a fair question. What do you mean? Well, what we mean with that one is that regardless on the fact that what I've been teaching to my colleagues as well for years and years and years, you are in an extremely much better position if you have created your content types and site columns using code rather than XML from element XML file. And this relates on this application. So if you have created, if you have site columns and content types in your existing site collections which are created using XML, and you have content created and you retract the solution, especially site columns will get broken. But the existing data will be there, and none of the lists where the site columns and content types are, they will be working still. Any new stuff will actually get broken. And that's quite often might cause a significant issue. So therefore, if you would have actually created your stuff using code, we wouldn't have any references to the XML files in the 15 Hive. So therefore, we're able to retract the solution away from the farm without impacting any of the existing sites. And I know that it's a controversial thing, but that's just a finding what we have now found out when we are helping our global customers or big enterprises on the transition to that well. And there is work being done right now by the product group on the fact that we are able to in the future have a reliable way of retracting site columns and content types from the file system without impacting the sites. I don't have a timeline for it, but I know, because I've been chatting with the guy even today, that there is right now work being done in the PG on that one. If you have a hybrid environment, can you do a site provisioning in one environment or the other depending on your answer on the form creation form? My thought is yes, but how would complex it might be the solution? Martin is asking. 2 weeks ago, I was doing a session which was called site provisioning with Bert Janssen, and Bert actually showed a model where we were doing provisioning from Windows Azure against Office 365 and on-prem. So you can have a one form where the end user is selecting, do I want this to be high secure or is it highly confidential? And if it's highly confidential, we provision the sites to the on-prem. And that code is available for you as well from the officeams.codeplex.com. You probably want to go there and download that example. I know, and I'm running quite late. I'll come back on the questions. The one thing what I wanted to, the other stuff, what we need to remember, how do we clean them up? Timer jobs. The good thing about the timer jobs is that they are code. They do something in a scheduled way. Yes, you cannot actually have a one-to-one replacement, and the remote APIs are not as powerful as the server-side APIs. But the model what I showed during the demo, we can actually run the stuff outside of the SharePoint in a scheduled way. So it's not as painful thing as people were initially thinking. The problematic things are these three. If you have a custom field types, that's a problematic thing because your existing structures and content is dependent on this custom field type, and that would mean a full migration project. If you're using a custom site definitions, that would actually mean a custom migration project. You can't get rid of the custom site definition without, you can do full application without full migration project. Or if you're moving from a publishing to a non-publishing site, which is the case what I had, which was a wrong design decision a few years back, we're trying to now decustomize that away. And that requires a full migration project. And what I mean with the full migration project is, well, the number one question, okay, how do we succeed with the full migration process? Well, this is a kind of a joke. The number one thing and number one option when we think about migrating of old sites or FTC to the amplified sites is the answer should be perform it manually. The assumption, obviously, if it's too much content and it's too many sites, then we need to actually think this through. But the only way you can make this 100% reliably is that you actually perform the migration, essentially meaning download the files from another site collection, move it across to the amplified site collection, and you're good to go. Most likely, some of the customers don't like that. So that's where we need to then think about alternative ways. We have third-party components. We have third-party offerings by our partners. And we do have a community tooling, which is actually working, but there's no proper documentation for it. So that's the only downside on that community tooling. But essentially what it means is that we export the data from the, let's say, custom site definitions or custom or well, custom site definition is a good example. We export the data, we massage the data, and we import the data back, meaning that we import the data back against out-of-the-box functionality. So therefore, we get rid of that full trust code dependency. Good. 2 slides, and then I'm going to go back on the questions. So the business value. So coming back on the business value, what the customer had. We went through technical stuff and technical demos, but it's not about obviously about the code. It's about IT supporting the business. And the business, in the case of this one, a customer business wanted to have a cloud readiness. Again, they didn't want to go to the Office 365 necessarily. They wanted to have a readiness to go there, so they can actually decide if they want to go there or not. And they're running in on-prem, but then they can decide that, okay, now the time is right, and let's do the movement. And the code, the customization doesn't block that. That was the #1 thing for their executives in the customer. Agility for the business. We can now deploy. You need a new master base in your site collections. Well, not a problem. You just push it against the site collections. You don't need to do a service break, which is pretty significant. We were able to on-fly modify these site collections and customizations just by pushing them using the file insert or file update REST APIs or the CSM APIs. No downtime. That's a pretty significant thing. I don't know about you, but I hate those Saturdays or Sundays when I need to be working for the sake that we minimize the impact for the end users. Well, that used to be the case in my starting time of consulting. Cost efficiency, well, obviously these are from a customer perspective, they wanted to have an optimized value on how do they actually do the stuff. So decustomization, but at the same time, customize where it's actually meaningful. Key takeaways before I show you the code location as well. Lots of proven patterns. We have a lot of proven patterns, and we're sharing a lot of that in our Office AMS as an example from my blog as well. So it's not just about web part equal and app part discussion. And we should not compare FTC to app model as one-to-one. It's all about understanding what are they actually trying to achieve. Why are you doing that? Okay, it's a web part, but why is the web part there? Well, it's a blah, blah, blah. Yes, but why do you actually want to do that? Now I got it. So we can implement that using an embedded JavaScript on blah, 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 blah. So you really want to understand why. And then remember to consider the content, not only just the functionality. We need to think about how do we get that old stuff, if that's an objective as well. So that might be a challenge. Actually, technical implementation is easy. Getting the old stuff to transform to the new world might be extremely difficult. This is the address one more time. I know that I'm talking Finglish, so you probably didn't get it. So the officeams.codeplex.com is the location where you can actually download right now all of those 3 demos and a lot of other demos as well, which are related on the appification. Right now, the Office AMS stuff is more about site provisioning and how do we do this trick and, well, not tricks, how do we implement similar stuff as in FTC using the app vault techniques.